So Philip K. Dick had this theory that time was an illusion and that we were all actually in 50 AD. And the reason he had written this book was that he had somehow momentarily punctured through this illusion, this veil of time, and what he had seen there was what was going on in the book of Acts. And he was really into Gnosticism and this idea that this demiurge or demon had created this illusion of time to make us forget, that Christ was about to return and the kingdom of God was about to arrive. And that we're all in 50 AD, and there's someone trying to make us forget, that, God is imminent. And that's what time is. That's what all of history is. It's just kind of this continuous, daydream or distraction. Now, Philip K. Dick is right about time, but he's wrong that it's 50 AD. Actually, there's only one instant, and it's right now, and it's eternity. And it's an instant in which God is posing a question. And that question is basically, do you want to, be one with eternity? Do you want to be in heaven? And we're all saying, no, thank you, not just yet. And so time is actually just this constant saying no to God's invitation. I mean, that's what time is. And it's no more 50 AD than it's 2001. There's just this one instant, and that's what we're always in.
Yeah, Birdie Num Num and Warm Leatherettes. Had to bring out this PKD speech from Waking Live, 'cause it typifies Aeon Bite. Shocking, eh? But even more appropriate as we mark our 14-year anniversary. A celebration that somehow for so long I've been able to, as Dick himself said, restore Gnostic gnosis to the world in a trashy form. These celebrations are not about me, your host Miguel Connor, but more of a celebration about your liberation and individuality. In these times I never knew were so bloody Gnostic until my red pill suppository fully melted in these outer rectums of reality, as I learned more and experienced the truth of this terra damnata. Thanks for being here. You honor me with your company and insight and destructive passion. Thank you.
We live, we fight, and we die for each other.
In this celebration, we will be going really as above, so below, my beloved truth seekers, in a true astro-theological bacchanalia. We'll be talking about the gnosis of Lovecraft, as well as proffer a tribute to Acharya S. Lovecraft and Acharya, you may be asking? Well, you will see the correlation, for in truth, both Lovecraft and Acharya look to the stars for inner insights and answers on the deepest nature of humankind. Both figures were also psychonauts who took a deep dive into the stellar lagoons of the collective unconscious and brought back archetypal pearls of great wisdom, and often warning, and changed the souls of so many individuals. As different as their work and lives were, Lovecraft and Acharya went where no man has gone before. And their work and stories remain to encourage you to reach your own constellations of wonder, inside and out. In essence, write your own gospel and live your own myth.
What we do in life echoes in eternity.
As Joseph Campbell wrote, and where we had thought to find an abomination, we shall find a God. Where we had thought to slay another, we shall slay ourselves. Where we had thought to travel outward, we shall come to the center of our own existence. Where we had thought to be alone, we shall be all the world.
All these wonders of art, design, human ingenuity, all utterly meaningless in the face of the only question that matters. Where do it come from?
For this heroic task of Lovecraft and Acharya S, we are joined at the virtual Alexandria by Robert and Qarol Price. As a bonus, I'll provide a past interview with Scott Jones, author of When the Stars Are Right, where he really punches through the Gnostic themes and the Cthulhu mythos. You'll be blown away.
If it can be destroyed by the truth, It deserves to be destroyed by the truth.
Truly honored by the company of Bob and Qarol, as I'm honored to serve you as your Pompatus of Gnosis for the last 14 years. I'm only getting started and hope you are too. And what have I learned in these 14 years? Let me give you a listicle, which you have grokked, are grokking, or will grok as we continue here in the desert of the real.
I, like God, do not play with dice and do not believe in coincidence.
It's better to burn out than to fade away.
Number 1, the great choice in this era is between ecstasy and entertainment. Start living your existence for the former. Number 2, the awakening of an individual is a cosmic rebellion. Period. The more gnosis I have, the more I rebel. I can't help it, because expanded consciousness begets freedom, and freedom begets a lucid rejection of the constructs of this world.
None of you seem to understand. I'm not locked in here with you.
You're locked in here with me.
Number 3, humanity is more enslaved than I could have ever imagined. That includes most occultists and so-called modern Gnostics. They've all sold out for certainty and security. I'm talking about the pigs in Zen, pigs.
Quite an experience to live in fear, isn't it? That's what it is to be a slave.
If people can't control their own emotions, then they have to start trying to control other people's behavior.
Number 4, love is a promise. Sophia's promise to us and our promise to having an experience of her. Number 5, gnosis is the knowledge of the heart. Number 6, our souls are made of stories, not atoms. Number 7, growth and evolution are Gorgon shit. Transformation brings down the creator gods. As Carl Jung said, for the alchemist, the one primarily in need of redemption is not man, but the deity who is lost in sleeping in matter.
Ray, when someone asks you if you're a god, you say, yes!
Number 8, the goal of transformation is to be fully divine, yes, but also fully human. As Abraham Heschel said, being human is difficult. Becoming human is a lifelong process. To be truly human is a gift.
Sir, are you classified as human?
Negative. I am a meat popsicle.
Number 9, all the commandments in the Bible are nothing compared to merely following the Gospel of Thomas saying 6. And it goes. Jesus said, do not tell lies and do not do what you hate. For all things are in plain sight of heaven. For nothing hidden will not become manifest, and nothing covered will remain hidden.
It's been a brilliant journey of self-awakening. Now you've simply got to ask yourself this. What is happiness to you?
Number 10. The secret to happiness is found in the Gospel of Thomas, saying number 42. Become a passerby. That's it. Number 11. The empire never ended. To fight the empire is to become the empire. See the list above to defeat the empire.
Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong.
Am I wrong?
You're not wrong. You're just an asshole.
Okay then.
Heck and heckety. Let me quote scholar Stephen Davis to end, which summarizes all that I've said and most of what I'll be saying in the future. Here it goes. Perhaps you are one of those remarkable people who experience an overpowering realization of the divinity of existence. You suddenly know that everything is divine and that within you lies an ocean of God. Will you know this all of the time and every day? No. You will crest and fall and submerge again into the mundane. The realization of divinity as the be-all and end-all, as the substance of your very self, that within which you live and move and have your being, does not dominate every day, although you wish it would. The ordinary world of aches and pains and approaching death, of trouble, temptation, sin, stress, and loss seems to rule almost all the time. And yet, sometimes you can seize what you seek and see glory everywhere and know yourself to be divine.
My father says that almost the whole world is asleep. Everybody you know, everybody you see, everybody you talk to. He says that only a few people are awake, and they live in a state of constant, total amazement.
If you are one of those people, you are one of the Gnostics. You know what you truly are, that you are God, just as everyone else is. But as a Gnostic, your existence in this ordinary and difficult world puzzles you. You ask, how did I come to be here? You don't seem to belong here. You belong in a world, a realm of divinity. And it certainly seems that the divine realm is not everyday reality. But if, in full reality, everything that exists is God, why don't we always know this? Why do some people never even think it possible to be what, in their depths, they really are? Why don't we know who we are? How did we come to forget? What holds us back from perpetual realization of our divinity, and what traps so many people in denying that their own divinity is even conceivable? These are the Gnostics' questions.
What is real? How do you define real?
Gnostics know that God is all, and that they themselves are God. They experience this knowledge, this realization, and know that everyone else could share their experience. But they are continually thrown back into the seemingly hard material reality that tells them they are merely flawed humans, kin to apes, doomed to die, ruled by a judgmental creator God who often does not know a fondness for people at all.
I'd say bone cancer in children? What's that about? How dare you? How dare you create a world in which there is such misery that is not our fault? It's not right. It's utterly, utterly evil. Why should I respect a capricious, mean-minded, stupid God who creates a world which is so full of injustice and pain?
Gnostics rebel against their churches and their priests, their Bible-based pastors, whose obsession with God's supposed desire to control behavior seems not to be what true religion is about. To Gnostics, true religion, elite spirituality, is a realization of the divinity of every person, an experience of ascent to the divine homeland. It is a knowledge of the way we once were as God, and of the process by which God came to be self-forgetful as to become us, mere human beings under the control of another lesser God.
I am the architect. I created the Matrix. I've been waiting for you.
Gnosticism is a religion of rebels, creative thinkers whose works were systematically destroyed by Orthodox Christianity. They lived in the home of heresy, for they were the source of self-assertiveness against the episcopal demand for sameness. They persisted in the shadows, in certain Sufi sects, in the Christian Cathar movement, and perhaps even among the Knights Templar and the Rosicrucian orders.
In other words, we're talking about an underground, which did exist in a different way during the Dark Ages. And the purpose of this underground is to find out how to preserve the light, life, the culture, how to keep things living.
Their speech resounds today in the Nag Hammadi Library, read today by spiritual seekers throughout the world. Their central message is that God fell and became us, and how, through knowing that story, we can return to glory and be absorbed again into God.
In the Thomas Gospel, Jesus says, "He who drinks from my mouth will become as I am, and I shall be he." Wow. And we are all to do that. To wake up to our Jesus within us. This is blasphemy in the normal way of thinking in Christianity, but it's the very essence of Gnosticism and of the Thomas Gospel.
And heaven, that desired goal of most people, is within us?
All the gods, all the heavens, all the worlds are within us.
This is the Aeon Bite interview, and with us we definitely have the pleasure of being joined by Qarol Price and Robert Price to discuss a whole bunch of heretical sundries, including the new edition of the Christ Conspiracy, Bob's book, Horrors and Heresies, and a whole lot of Lovecraft, we hope. Qarol and Bob, thanks for coming on the show, as always.
Great to be here with you.
Yeah, you bet.
Truly an honor. And as I mentioned, this is an Aeon Bite anniversary show. The show has been around now 14 years. I don't know what the hell I'm doing, but I hope I'm sharing some good heresy, some good insights with the world. And Bob, you were my first guest. That was in 2006. We did 2 hours of Gnosticism, and back then I didn't know what I didn't know what you were talking about most of the time, but I think I've caught up a bit. Exactly. What is he saying? Dositheus. What is this guy talking about? I don't get it.
Yeah.
But it was an honor, and you started it with me, and it's been a great journey, and here we are.
That's terrific.
And with us, a great companion, too, of this show, and that is the Moondog Vance. Vance, how are you doing, and thanks for being here.
Oh, I've been looking forward to this all week, to be here with you and Bob and Qarol. So without further ado, before I become the ventriloquist dummy for Cthulhu, let's go.
Yeah, I figured I'm surprised you didn't hit us with a pun. There's so many puns with Lovecraft, but
well, I had to do a Lovecraft thing.
Yeah, well, it's early. So awesome. Well, why don't we get started? I think this show kind of relates because the dearly departed Acharya S was all about the stars. In a way, Lovecraft's Mythos is all about the stars, the perils and opportunities of what lies in the stars. So I think it connects a lot, and I think we'll find a lot of connections in this journey. But Bob, tell us about you deciding or undertaking the project of doing the second edition of a book that really informed me, The Christ Conspiracy.
Well, when I first heard about this, I happened to be on another radio show or podcast, I forget which, run by Minnesota atheists, and this was way back there. And the host was discussing one of my books, I guess it was probably Deconstructing Jesus, and Acharya's Christ Conspiracy, maybe another one too. And the more I heard of it, the more I thought, oh boy, I don't know if I want to be even associated with this. And somehow, not long afterward, I wound up reading the book to review it. And I found plenty in there to object to, some things that just were distractions, that were needless stumbling blocks to the critical reader. Like she got into all sorts of stuff like the maps of the ancient sea kings and the Masons and the Catholic Church conspiracies, and made various either dubious or irrelevant suggestions about this and that, like that Mark was originally written in Latin, which it wasn't, but she probably got it because somebody rightly pointed out there are various Latinisms, like even though it's written in Greek, certain Latin words were borrowed. But she kind of jumped the gun on that, and various other things that seemed wacky to me, like she didn't really know what she was talking about. And I said so in a long review where she was using old mythicist sources, some of which had been debunked. And she made claims like that the crucifixion of Christ is ultimately derived from Asian Indian crucifixions of the Buddha and Krishna and so forth. And I thought, what is this? Where is she getting this? And I followed up some of her references and found that I didn't think she was understanding what they said. And sometimes it was just so vague that it was really raising more questions rather than answering them, which she thought she was doing. So I really gave it to this book. And mainly, as I said in my review, I don't want to be tarred with this brush. We don't all think this way. Well, once she saw it some way or other, naturally she was affronted by it, and she got pretty nasty. Though I could sympathize, I wouldn't have been too thrilled either. I meant nothing against her, but I just felt like I ought to try to set things straight, if only to save the kind of mythicism I represent from ridicule and dismissal. Well, eventually, I was discussing something about the sacred mushroom and the cross theory of John Allegro, and the issue came up as to whether this famous, mind-blowing fresco on I think one of the walls of the catacombs or something, it seems to show Adam and Eve and the serpent and the tree of knowledge looks like a giant Amanita muscaria mushroom. And this was so shocking that you could almost see Allegro's theory come to life. I mean, this wasn't just speculation, but then some art historian said, oh, no, that's a lot of nonsense. This is just a stylized representation of an Italian pine tree of some kind common in the art of the late Middle Ages. And so I said, well, if somebody can show that, I was disappointed to find out it wasn't the mushroom. And so please let me know if there's another side to this. Well, she happened to see this post of mine and said, emailed me and said, I'm surprised you're as open-minded on that as you are. And that got us in dialogue. And I said, look, I must apologize. I realize I gravely offended you, and I can understand it. I didn't mean it. And I would like to ask you to forgive me for the offense I tendered toward you. And
she also outed her by name.
Yeah.
She was not known by her real name until you...
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's a DM Murdoch. She was not too thrilled about that. Partly because she had some kind of stalker and didn't want it known where she lived. And I said, look, I don't know and I don't want to know. I don't want to get involved in anything like that. Well, we became good friends immediately afterward. And I would review the subsequent books of hers, which were much better, much more scholarly, all-encompassing, and so forth. And she quickly learned, as she admitted later, she really was instructed by my nasty review and avoided those mistakes in the future. Well, things went on, and as you know, she was in the hospital at death's door, really. And about the last thing she said was that she wanted the revised edition she had planned to be given to me to complete. And I thought, holy mackerel, what an honor. And so I got started on it, and a couple of other people added appendices and the like. And what I did was to trim it down somewhat and cut out the stuff that simply was irrelevant. And I think I kind of strengthened her arguments a couple of times and stylistically polished it up a little bit. And I think the result is really her book, but with my efforts to improve it rather than critique it as I had before. So I'm very proud of it, and I think it is a really good resource and a good thing to remember her by. She was really terrific.
Wonderful, yeah, and please, out there, audience, buy the book, help her family out, and you will be so much wiser. I remember reading The Christ Conspiracy, and it blew my mind. I didn't have too much of a problem with some of her, like the ideas of Allegro and salt and the doorways of the pyramids. I always thought she was just sort of speculating and sort of putting things out there. And I do remember I was already talking to Acharya back then. I remember your review, and it wasn't all wrong, Bob. For example, I noticed she called Augustine a Mandean, and even back then that I didn't know much, I knew he was a Manichaean, but it certainly worked out well. And like you said, her scholarship was just incredible. One thing that I always thought it was interesting, and I don't think she ever backed down too much beyond the mythicism, she didn't back down. But she always felt there was this sort of brotherhood of tectons, of Freemasons, socially engineering religions. And she would tell me about it. And she would, for example, say Philo of Alexandria is the perfect example. I mean, this man easily, with all his money and intelligence, could have influenced Christianity, Judaism, and the world himself. He was, I guess you say, the Bill Gates of those times, if you want to make a comparison today. But what do you think about that, Bob?
Oh, that's it might be slightly overstated, but with Philo, I think the influence of Philo on the New Testament and early Christianity is manifest and obvious. You got to do a lot of explaining how it cannot be so if you don't like it. And I've noticed that some do that, like, at least as I read him, James D.G. Dunn, who many of his books I just love, he said that he tried to explain away some of these things about the Logos and all that is so similar to New Testament Christology. He tried to say, well, yeah, but Philo was just using figurative speech in the New Testament. They really meant it. The Logos was a real person and all that. And I've written about that and said, I just don't see the distinction. This just seems to me apologetics trying to hermetically seal off the New Testament from any spooky sounding influences. But yeah, he was in touch with the Stoics and the Middle Platonists, and I think, well, Eusebius thought that Philo was a Christian. He's so close to the Logos, Christology, and all that. Eusebius figured, well, the guy must have been a Christian, and somewhere he got the idea that Philo had gone to Rome to meet with Peter. I'd love to know where he got that, but that's kind of a shocker, really, that here is a notable early Christian that took this even farther, not just Philonic influence on early Christianity, but that it was a part of early Christianity. Like, holy mackerel. They don't quote Eusebius much on that, but that's what he said.
But, Bob, you don't see this sort of secret society creating religions and like Acharya thought.
Yeah, to me, that is unrealistic, pure speculation. And I've always thought, it's possible, but I just don't think it's true. It's the same sort of conspiracy thing where you read that Constantine and the Council of Nicaea picked out the contents of the New Testament canon. That is utter nonsense. It is just wrong in every way. It's so I try to correct that, and this is the same sort of a thing. It's oversimplifying historical process, and this is the same sort of thing. It must have been the result of a bunch of staff writers coming up with a new TV show, and that seems anachronistic to me. It's not impossible, but my big objection to that one was it's a superfluous theory given the major theory of Acharya, the Astro-theology thing, which I take very seriously. You just need to read two books that I don't know if Acharya read them, probably did. She seemed to have read everything else. One is by Ignaz Goldziher, a great Hungarian student of the Old Testament and of Islam. In his book, Mythology Among the Hebrews, he goes through many Old Testament stories and shows very convincingly that the various characters originally represented the stars and the planets, the sun and the moon. And once you read that and you take a second look at the stories, like, you can't really doubt it. And the hints, if you even want to call them that, are there that Samson, Elijah, Moses, Esau, and others simply were the sun, and then personified as a sun god, and then kind of demoted to a demigod or just an exceptional human being. This is a pattern you find all over the world in mythology. And in the New Testament, there's Jesus possesses some solar characteristics, but there's so much else going on there. I'm not sure if that's the best of examples. But when you look at the book of Revelation, as Bruce J. Molina did in his book, something like The Genre and Message of Revelation, this guy did an amazing job looking up ancient astrology / astronomy, and shows that permeates the book of Revelation. All the hitherto puzzling symbols and so on, we know what they mean if you look hard enough, and it's got astrology and astronomy throughout the book on every page. And just look at those two books. You won't think Acharya is some kind of eccentric nut. She might have pushed it farther than them, but they pushed it pretty far, and I accept what they said. So if you do think astrotheology is the explanation, for instance, why the cross would be a sacred symbol in both hemispheres before they had any contact, well, that everybody's got the same night sky, and they saw these things and used their imagination to come up with what they were and who they were. So that would explain it. A lot of it, just without any real, like, why did the Egyptians and the Mayans and Aztecs, why did they all have pyramids? Well, is it like in the song, what was it, Donovan of Atlantis? I love that song. That the people fled Atlantis, the pyramid makers going to the left and the right. No, but it's not that tough to come up with the idea. And so some of these things are simply spontaneous parallels. And that's what astrotheology is positing. And I think that is still very powerful. It's not some kind of antiquated or nutty view in the least.
Not at all. Back then, the stars was the internet. It was the entertainment, the mnemonic device. It was everything to the ancients, and we've lost that ability with all this light pollution. But if you go somewhere secluded, my God, it's amazing what you can find. And Qarol, I'd like to ask you, if it hasn't been asked before, do you see yourself as a mythicist, or where do you stand with Jesus?
I've not been asked. I really don't have much of an opinion on it, because I find that it's difficult to believe thoroughly in many historical figures. Anyway, I guess I concentrate on whether their message makes any sense, and their existence doesn't really matter, or if they ever had existed. So I can't say that I have a strong opinion one way or the other.
Awesome. And did you read Acharya's work at all, or?
Bob and I, a lot of our readings don't overlap. I'm a little more on the metaphysical side of things, and I sort of get a lot from what he talks about, but there's so much to read. I'm afraid that it doesn't overlap much. We come together on horror and philosophy and psychology, I guess.
No, there's so much with the Jesus theory, and I don't have. I'm like Bob. I don't really care what anybody else thinks. I mean, I don't even know if Vance is a mythicist or what you are, Vance. What are you? Now that we, after all these years, I'm going to ask you.
Well, yeah, pretty much. I'd have to say, although I'm with Qarol, which is I'm more concerned with what the messages are, and I'm not even sure I exist historically. So I guess that makes me a metamythicist.
Good deal. Well, interesting. Well, again, the audience, please get Acharya's book. It's really worth the read. I'm sure the second edition is great. I'm going to purchase it too, although I still have my copy from like 17 years ago that I bought it and loved it, and I've got all of Acharya's books ever since then. They've all been just excellent. And like Bob said, she just got sharper and better and more insightful as she went, and her scholarship just got tighter. So she definitely rewarded the world with amazing, not just about Christianity, but just mythology in general. I think that's what I loved about Acharya. She would bring, she had so much passion about Hinduism and South America and all these other religions. I mean, don't you think, Bob, it's rare to find somebody like that?
Yeah, she really had a world's eye view on this stuff, very much like people like Joseph Campbell and others who, Houston Smith, people that know enough about it that when they begin to synthesize it, it's worth listening to, even if you don't wind up absolutely agreeing. But there's so much in it that that somebody with an eagle eye can really mine it and bring things out, like Campbell with the mythic hero archetype and so forth. It's basically Jungian, as he admits, but he throws the net very far and wide and brings in all these parallels and tries to show how they amount to a sort of religious humanism. He didn't seem to be a theist, but he sort of looked at it psychologically, and I have to call him a religious humanist because his stance was this awe before the depths of human nature. And I think he would have agreed with Tillich that you can speak of a God above or God below, that is within, and it really doesn't matter.
Well said indeed, and I would agree. And I think, Acharya had such awe for, she really, as cranky as she could get, she really loved what humanity created, the art, the religions, the myth, and everything. So I learned how to be positive, but also to be critical of all the BS out there, which manifested with fundamentalism and other expressions. But so awesome. Well, why don't we get into a little H.P. Lovecraft? Again, this is also Astro-theology, as we will find out. And I think we're going to find out we'll have to deal more with Jung when talking about Lovecraft and his impact and everything else. But why don't we start with you, Qarol? Tell us about your encounters with Lovecraft and what you think of him.
Well, surprisingly, I have not read a lot of Lovecraft. Why am I on this? No, and I'm fascinated with horror in general. Lovecraft. I mean, I have read Lovecraft, and he's there's something. Well, I would say transcendent about the horror element. I mean, about the existential aspect of it. And I think it's an expression. I mean, I think of Lovecraft as an author that, is sort of in touch with something deeply psychological. I'm not good at articulating these things, but But something very important, and it really seems to, I don't know, strike a chord with. I've observed it in so many people, that Bob has been around and been in touch with. I've observed their connection with Lovecraft, and I just find it so fascinating.
What about the horror genre in itself? I mean, again, we mentioned Jung. Do you think horror, and of course, if you want to take this away, is horror as simple as we are addressing our shadow? We're finding some sort of catharsis? I mean, horror has been around since ancient times.
Well, today it's not very well respected as a genre. And I think in the culture, we don't like when things are too scary. Like Halloween is starting to really fade out of the culture. It's sort of impolite to be too scary, I think, or even politically incorrect. That children should dress up like their favorite superhero or animal or princess, which is fine. I mean, different personas are fine, but the opportunity to deal with the shadow in a safe way, in a way that it coaxes people to go there, because we need to be psychologically healthy. And but unfortunately, like horror, it never wins an Oscar, and for example, I mean, it's just not taken seriously. But things like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde are some of the greatest things written about our nature. And well, it's done with horror. But I'll let Bob take over. He has some great things to say.
Well, stuff like the picture of Dorian Gray and the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and especially those really are cautionary tales. They're didactic, though the only problem with didactic fiction is sometimes it lacks the literary merit, because they just can't wait to get to the punchline, but not the case with these books or the movies. In fact, at least I think this is still true, there have been more film versions of Jekyll and Hyde than of any other book. And it's not too tough to see why, because it shows that the attempt to attain what the Methodists used to call entire sanctification, to eradicate the sinful or the lower human nature, is a big mistake, because it's not going anywhere. And the more you repress it, the more the time bomb is ticking. And I think that explains why some religious leaders and otherwise respectable people suddenly are scandal-ridden. Like, what is this guy doing with his secretary? Or how could this guy be such a hateful bigot? I think it's because they, in their better moments, they really would abhor these things, but they've just suppressed them, and now it explodes, and they're as surprised as anybody else. And, how when mass murderers like the son of Sam are arrested, people say, well, I never would have expected it from this guy. He was as nice as the day was long, but he's got a whole bunch of severed heads in the basement. Like, that's often the case with people that have exploded into an evil nova. They were surprised too. They thought they had everything under control. But Jung points out the way to do that is to face the shadow and to deal with it in a non-harmful way. I think what he said about the archetypes is true of the shadow. It's all of a piece anyway, but he said that if you want to become mature, if you want to become an individual, he called the whole process individuation, you've got to first consolidate the ego and you're the center of everything, and you have to be through adolescence or whatever to provide the springboard for becoming a self with a capital S, where there's no longer a dichotomy between your interests and those of mankind. You make everyone's interests your own, and some people wind up like Albert Schweitzer and so forth, where they're living for the world because they sort of are the world. And so how are you going to get to that point? Well, everybody has hardwired into their brains these archetypes, these numbers and geometric shapes and so forth. And we see them in fairy tales, in myths, in art. And the reason and they're in every culture. Why? Well, because we need to be exposed to them, or to expose ourselves to them, and we have them in dreams and so on. And I see them as like computer icons. You've got all of these programs in the computer, but you're not going to be able to use them unless you click on the icon. Well, the archetype seen in the myth or whatever is that's the icon. You press it by if it's a ritual, living out the symbol, like baptism for resurrection and things like that. And the more of this you do, the more of these unconscious territory you survey and become familiar with, the broader and deeper you become, and you're on your way to real maturity. And that's equally true of the shadow. You've got to dine with the devil with a long spoon, rather than actually doing nefarious things.
See, and that's what you're doing with tarot cards. There's a lot of archetypes floating around there, and you commune with them in a sense, and you get to know that territory, as you say. But isn't it funny how that is considered taboo among a lot of religions? That there's fear surrounding getting to know oneself, whether it be the shadow or just, everything. Diving in to the psyche is somewhat taboo. And, again, tarot cards, I mean, they seem to be something of the occult, which only means hidden. But so people shy away from it. They give in to fears, and this is another thing that the shadow is dealing with is allowing people to face their fears. What are they? Well, all these taboos that are handed down, or it's a host of things. But yeah, the tarot card reminded me of your icons.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's terrific. Alone among fundamentalists that I know of, John Warwick Montgomery, a extremely conservative Lutheran, he, oddly enough, has a fascination with the occult and understands that all of this night side stuff has a positive nature and function in a Christian worldview. So he talks about how alchemy is self transcendence and transformation by the power of the Holy Spirit. I mean, of course, there are other ways of looking at it, but he says that's how Christian alchemists viewed it. Or the tarot and the Kabbalah. There have been Christian versions of these for centuries, and so it's like a narrowing of scope, and it's a very old religious problem when the religious authorities try to control the sources of divination or revelation. We don't want you reading the horoscope, Isaiah says. We don't want you having seances. No, you come to us and we will use the authorized methods to tell you the truth, because we want to contain what is meant by truth. That's why the Catholic Church is pretty picky about Marian apparitions. They need to control it. They don't know what the heck the perpetual motion, Our Lady of Perpetual Motion is saying, unless it checks out. And of course, if it checks out, it means it's useless as a revelation since you already know it. But that's what they want. With Lovecraft, this ties in a couple of ways with things you've said. What gave him the transcendent perspective he had was his boyhood fascination with astronomy. He went to the, I think, Moses Brown School's observatory when he was a young kid. He'd ride his bicycle there. And as a kid, he wrote astronomy columns for local newspapers. The kid was a genius. And this led to what he called Cosmicism, which he thought was the essential factor in horror, that when you grasp the vastness of and emptiness of the cosmos, and you begin to realize we are nothing in the larger scope of things. The sun's going to go nova one day. There'll be nobody to remember that humanity was ever here. All of our art, architecture, music, cultural achievements gone. We will have left as little a mark on the universe as the pterodactyl did. And this is really the shocker that Lovecraft tries to convey when people in his stories discover the old ones of Antarctica or Cthulhu or whatever, because what that's telling them is there are utterly non-human life forms vastly superior to us, and they may even have created us as a joke, and because that's ultimately all we are. And when he was a kid, he became suicidal temporarily, riding his little bike to the river where he planned to drown himself. And at the last minute, he said, nah, I'm not going to do it. The world is just too beautiful, too fascinating to exit it like that. And he said that's what his whole ethic was based on, kind of an ancient Greek thing, the beauty of good behavior and good character and all that. But as Fritz Leiber, a great horror writer himself, kind of a protege of Lovecraft, few decades ago, he wrote the definitive piece on what Lovecraft was doing. It's a Copernican revolution. He made science. He substituted science for the supernatural and had a vision of the numinous, the mysterium tremendum that Rudolf Otto said was at the basis of all religious experience. Something triggers the awareness of the mysterium tremendum, the mystery at which we tremble, and the mysterium fascinans, the mystery that fascinates and enthralls us. And that's why we have a double-edged reaction to these epiphanies. We fear it because in the light of it, we recognize our ultimate nullity. As Isaiah says when he sees God on the throne in the temple, he says, woe is me, for I am undone. And there's several things like this. Moses is afraid to look at God, and so on and so on. There you can find examples in all religions all over the world. And he says that's what Lovecraft is talking about. His protagonists see the horrifying but fascinating sublime. And why are you attracted to it? Like any kid in a horror movie, I'm sure you've seen or you've done this, where somebody is covering their eyes, but then they start peeking through their fingers. They're
Yes.
afraid to see it, but they've got to see it. And that's the primal religious experience. So there is this sublime encounter that is essential to religion and to Lovecraft's vision of horror, and he learned it from astronomy. So it is so profound. Now, I admit not everything is profound. You can have horror comedies and so on. What the heck? Just entertainment. But there are amazing lessons to be learned from horror fiction and films. And even if it's not a lesson, if it provokes in you this kind of numinous terror and so forth, that's wholesome. That's religion. So there's so much good to be said about it, though I don't want to negate the dark side of it. Like the thing that's wrong with kids dressing up as clowns and hobos for Halloween. They're taking what was the dark side and dragging it into the light. So everything is cuteness and niceness. Hey, that's not the point. Maybe that's what you want to be, and so that's your ideal self, and you've got the chance to show that, exhibit it. But what you're supposed to do is to exhibit your own dark side in a harmless way.
Clowns aren't dark.
Well, yeah, true.
Yeah, Pennywise.
Yeah, Joker.
Yeah.
They are now. Yeah, well, that's really well said, both of you. And yes, I didn't know Fritz Lieber wrote horror. I just read his Farft and the Grey Mouser series and really loved it.
Oh, yeah.
Big fan of those, that great science fiction. And it's amazing, too. Again, back to our point, guys, it's, again, Acharya and Lovecraft looked at the stars. They focus on the stars. And somehow as Joseph Campbell, you see the horror of the universe, but at the same time, you are inspired to just be better and leave something better behind. So it's interesting how we have these two parallels.
Just like in Psalm 90, when I consider the heavens, the work of thy hands, the moon and the stars, which thou hast ordained, what is man that thou art mindful of him? And it ends up saying, at the most we live to be 80 or 90, but teach us to number our days, so we can do something that will last. I mean, that's exactly what you're saying, I think.
Yeah, very inspiring. And again, whether you like his fiction or not, or writing style, Lovecraft is one of the most influential science fiction writers and probably the most influential horror writer, even more than Edgar Allan Poe. I mean, he informed a whole generation. Even on this show, we talk a lot about Philip K. Dick. Philip K. Dick was hugely inspired by Lovecraft, even though the only horror he wrote about was about the surveillance state and all that. But Lovecraft it's amazing how he's affected the world, and he's still more popular than ever. I mean, you got the Color Out of Space just came out.
The movie, yeah.
Yeah, and then there's Lovecraft Country coming on HBO in the fall. I mean, he's still, again, more relevant and influential than ever.
Yeah. Yeah, he would have been amazed to see any of this. Plush toys of Cthulhu. He would not have believed it.
Yeah, I don't know what it felt. I mean, he obviously had a short and tragic and unhappy life, but at least you're explaining why he was who he is. But, I mean, obviously in this show, we want to talk, of course, some Gnostic themes, too. I mean, wasn't his other influence also theosophy, where he got a lot of his mythos or cosmology?
Yeah, you cannot really understand the shadow out of time without knowing about theosophy. Lovecraft didn't believe in it, but his friend E. Hoffman Price claimed to believe in it, and he told him all these things, and Lovecraft said, "Oh, this is just a rich vein to mine." And the Shadow Out of Time is really all about theosophy, but he mentions it by name in The Call of Cthulhu as well. And he says that theosophists have a kind of bland, naive understanding, but at least it's a beginning of understanding of the vast scope of the cosmos and cosmic history. So great. The fantasy part of it, Robert E. Howard and Fritz Leiber and others following in that path, they have somewhat of a different angle on it, but it's so compatible. Lovecraft and Howard were correspondents and buddies and read each other's stuff. Conan stories, for instance, Howard's heroic fiction, the glory of empire and battle and so forth, and nobility and the noble savage are all under the shadow of this cosmic void, that it's you may battle for the throne, but of course this too shall pass. And so there's a kind of philosophical depth in that, and it's on a continuum, I think. In the story collection Horrors and Heresies that we published, that I wrote, I have Lovecraftian themed stories, and like, for instance, the Caliphate of Cthulhu, where you find out that Islamic terrorism goes back to an unsuspected root, and the old ones and all that. Then I've got a retelling of the story of King Jehu from the Bible, where he's kind of like Howard's King Kull. And it's easy to spin it out that way, because there's religion and its myths have latent in them a lot of the elements of horror, because there's a dark side. I remember my mentor, Michael Kogan, was on some public access show with a local atheist, and Kogan was very liberal religiously and took things very figuratively. And he did not accept the debunking attitude of this sort of village atheist. And she was saying, how can you like the Bible with all this genocide and rape and murder and all that stuff? And Kogan said, well, the truth is not always nice. The Bible isn't about niceness. And it's trying to eliminate the dark side. And not the Bible, but complaints like this. You really need to face up to that and wrestle with it and so on. And the Bible does sometimes, and embarrasses its fundamentalist advocates, because they kind of wish it didn't have that in it either, but it does, and there's a reason.
Maybe it's the greatest horror story, the Old Testament, right?
Could be.
Hey, Bob, do you think there's any links between the stories that dwell in the Lovecraft mythos and Gnosticism?
Yeah, for one big thing, there's a kind of Faustian Gnostic element in it, that the Lovecraft's protagonists cannot resist following up clues to an unsuspected truth about human life, about the world, about the meaning in the universe, or the lack of it. And it's very dismaying, the more so, the more deeply they get into it, but they must know. So it's a knowledge that doesn't save the soul, but damns it. And yet one must know. And so that's and the ultimate knowledge is of cosmic futility. The guy in The Call of Cthulhu says, I wish I hadn't discovered this. Now the color and brightness have gone out of the world for me. So there's that. But in terms of specifics, his books like the Necronomicon are symbols of that. The Necronomicon volume is in his stories is very scarce, because ecclesiastical authorities for centuries have tried to destroy it, but a handful of copies remain scattered around the world, and this is hundreds of years old, written in the 700s or something. And so that's a double symbol of knowledge that is forbidden and ancient. So it takes some delving to find it, and you may be sorry you did. Okay, then one of those things is that the universe and its seeming laws are completely chaotic. And he says that there is this confusion, a nuclear chaos at the center of existence called Azathoth. And he may have gotten that from the Bible. Jeremiah was from the village of Anathoth, or who knows. But this entity is described as the blind idiot god that is kept asleep by idiot flute players. And if he ever wakes up, there's going to be big trouble. He borrowed that from Lord Dunsany, but it is central. And if there is a mad creator who didn't know what the heck he was doing. That kind of symbolizes and explains, quote unquote, the madness of the universe that we live in. Don't look for meaning in this, because Azathoth, the blind idiot god, created it. And that's just like the Gnostic demiurge, Yaldabaoth, or other names. I mean, that really is right out of Gnosticism.
But he doesn't have the strata above that with the aeons and the pleroma or whatever. That doesn't exist in his mythos.
No, by the time he gets to anything like that, like servant races, the Miko, the crustacean fungi from Yuggoth, and the Whisperer in Darkness, they're depicted as an alien race, though they do worship Nyarlathotep. The star-headed, the crinoid creatures in At the Mountains of Madness, they're creatures of science fiction, and yet beyond their mountain range, there is something that horrifies them. Like, what is that? There are humble gods of earth in some of the stories, but they're afraid of the great ones beyond them. And so he has this two-tiered thing, and with Auguster Leth, you have them transformed into basically races of archons serving the old ones. Though the old ones partake both of the ions of the pleroma, emanations from the ultimate god, which doesn't exist in Lovecraft, and the henchmen of the demiurge, the archons. So they're kind of all of these science fiction races that Lovecraft created. They become, or the deep ones in the Shadow over Innsmouth, they become lackeys and in effect archons.
But in the cosmology, the old ones are put to sleep or defeated by even older gods, right? Or is that a later thing, Bob?
That's later. It's Auguster Leth that introduced that wrinkle into it. And yet he's sort of building on the science fiction novellas of Lovecraft, where you have ancient wars between competing alien races. He's sort of taken that and crossed it with Lovecraft's earlier idea of monstrous gods, which are aliens anyway, so it was a natural sort of a fusion. But Derleth has the elder gods defeating the rebellious old ones, who were like, he compares it to the fall of the angels, and Cthulhu is like Lucifer and so on. Lovecraft never said that. For him, the ultimate beings are the old ones, who are not hostile to mankind, but indifferent to it. They symbolize the laws of nature, which must crush all intelligent life without even knowing they're doing it. That's, I mean, how the dinosaurs died. Somebody wipe them out. Oh, apparently it was this big bad asteroid. Well, yeah, you might as well have a asteroid a thought. So, because his thing was, it's not intentional. It's impersonal. Super personal. It's impersonal. And humans are you're not going to escape the tsunami. It's not like you've got an invasion of aliens. Sometimes he does speak that way, but it was Auguster Leth, followed by Brian Lumley and Lynn Carter and others who went in Derleth's direction and made it more systematic. I love those stories too, but Lovecraft is the one really with the nihilistic approach.
Yeah, and kind of keeping in vibe with the whole Gnostic theme, it seems the great trope in Lovecraft, if you've got a male man of science, he thinks he's got it all figured out, and he goes exploring, and then he has this sort of gnosis, sees that there's a lot more in the world than he has, but he just reacts by doing what most people should do, which is go insane, right?
It is great opening in The Call of Cthulhu. He says, so far, science hasn't harmed us much. Of course, this is before the atom bomb and all that. He said, but as we push further in all different directions, the revelations science brings us about the frightful character of the universe and our precarious place in it, what's going to happen is that the people will most people will retreat into a new dark age of superstition, and the ones that don't will just go crazy. And I have to think he's thinking of the controversy over evolution, which was pretty furious in his day. Because what is it that, what was the issue there? Well, that the Bible is not true, literally, and that we are not the crown of creation, the apple of the eye of a God who made the world for us and keeps it going. No, forget it. The monkey is your uncle. You are an ape. And he knew how distasteful that was to people. And he said, look what they're doing. They're retreating into superstition. And even today, I think like at least half of the American population rejects evolution for the same reason.
Here's an interesting point somebody brought up in this show, a past guest. He said that he saw Cthulhu as sort of a Gnostic Christ, because he was awakening from the dead and bringing this revelation to the world. And unlike the other gods, he's not just sort of reptilian or tentacle mess. He's sort of half humanoid and half monster. So he's like a demigod, like Jesus, and he sleeps. And of course, you've got Dagon, who's the John the Baptist character. Have you heard anything like this, Bob, or is this sort of a unique theory?
Well, I have heard it before, and Wilbur Whately is even more overtly a kind of a Christ satire, because he is a demigod with one human parent, Lavinia Whately, and one divine parent, Yog-Sothoth, and he is there to initiate the kingdom of God, the return of the old ones, and the scraping clean of human life on the earth. And he dies killed by a guard dog where he's trying to steal the Necronomicon. But that's sort of okay, because with his absence, the invisible behemoth he's been feeding, which is his own twin brother, albeit invisible, it breaks out of the building it was in and begins to ravage the countryside, devouring cattle, etc., and it makes its way up to the top of Sentinel Hill. And by this time, the Miskatonic University scholars have figured out what's going on, and they follow it up there and spray it with some kind of powder that makes it visible for an instant, and use a counter incantation from the Necronomicon. And as it begins to fade off and return to the other dimension, it croaks out, "Father!" And Burleson points out, this is like Jesus at the top of Mount Calvary. My God, why have you forsaken me? And I think that's pretty clear. Other people have said it too, but the first one I know was Don Burleson who pointed that out.
We at the end, first I'd like to say, Vance, thanks for keeping us on this journey into the stars.
Oh, I got to thank you, Miguel, for having me be on the show with Bob and Qarol. It's been great, guys. I admire your work, Bob, so keep it up.
Thank you.
Please.
Yes, thank you.
The stars were right.
Yeah.
The stars are in line. Well, thank you very much, Qarol and Bob, for coming on Aeon Byte on this anniversary special. And hopefully we will meet in a future one, and there'll be less shadows and more people will be, again, looking at the stars for answers.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. Have a good night, everyone.
You too.
Good night.
And there you have it, my beloved Truth Seekers. The first part of our interview with Qarol and Robert Price on this anniversary special. What a cool celebration. In our second part, we'll certainly get more into the Gnostic themes of the Cthulhu mythos, as well as associate some of Lovecraft's gods with ancient gods in myth and lore. You'll be surprised at some of the associations. Bob and Qarol will explain the influence on Lovecraft too. We'll take a deep dive into our favorite Lovecraft films or Lovecraft-inspired movies. We'll finally get into Bob's new book, Horrors and Heresies, a devilish blend of religion and Lovecraftian genre, which leads to some discussion on the Cathars, Apollonius of Tyane, Islamic mysticism, and much more. As mentioned in the intro, and as a bonus, I'll provide a past interview with Scott Jones, author of When the Stars Are Right, where he really punches through the Gnostic themes and the Cthulhu mythos. You'll be blown away. So become an AB Prime member or patron at Patreon for the full content, as well as many other cool bonuses that includes all past shows in their entirety. 14 years of shows. Just go to thegodabovegod.com or message my ass. Please continue to help me grow this Red Pill Cafeteria, even if it's donations or buying me books. We need Gnosis more than ever, and we've only just begun reaching those who need to wake up here in 2020. You won't find this high-quality Gnostic and Hermetic wisdom or guests and their unique insights anywhere else in cyberspace or even meat space. Thanks for being here on this anniversary of Astro-theology and starry fates. Thanks for being yourself, your true self, here in the desert of the real. Hello and goodbye, as always.